was there through one of the most volatile times in Kenya's recent history. And I think as a naive Australian going into this situation, thinking I was going there to help people, I think I realized pretty quickly that that wasn't really my role there. That's not what I was supposed to be doing. And every door I tried to push in that direction seemed to closed and cost me several $1,000s every time that happened.
Hello and welcome to episode 00026, episode 26 of the 10,000 Heroes podcast. I'm Ankur Shah Delight, and today's interview is with Harrison Gardner. Every episode, like every listener, is special. It's a unique creation, a beautiful, individualized experience. And by the end of every episode, I usually feel a deep connection, a sort of kinship, a witnessing of my guest. But this one is a little different because Harry and I have been friends for almost 15 years. And it often feels much longer than that. And he's been a role model to me at every point along that journey since the day I met him. At this point, he's gained prominence for being a builder and a building educator. And he's founded a building school in the west of Ireland. He's got a book coming out on building, and he's finishing up a TV show on building for Irish television. There's a lot of building. But I think for this first interview with Harry, and there definitely will be more, I wanted to focus on some of the earlier bits of transformation and his travels that really informed his journey. And I know we'll always get to the building parts later. And I know you'd probably love it either way, because that's how he is. So thanks again for engaging with today's show. Stay tuned after the interview for the debrief with my co-host, Nathan Ramos. And remember to email us, get in contact. Let us know how this is for you. info@10kh.show or on Twitter. Okay, here we go. Harrison Gardner. Could you share with me your first experience that gave you a little flavor? They're like, oh, I might not just do the normal path of what I see people around me doing and what I'm being told to do.
I guess that's tricky, because in most, really, I would consider what I do as the most normal thing in the world. I'm a builder. I build houses. I build my own house, and I think what's become slightly different from most other builders is that I've started teaching other people how to build their houses. It's funny. I don't think I would have always so proudly called myself a builder. I don't think it was what I was aspiring to be as a teenager. I was dabbling in it. My parents built the house that I grew up in. And so I was always surrounded by tools and building materials and half-built projects. But I definitely had aspirations to do other things. And I think the journeys that I went on were never intended to be building journeys, but they somehow always gravitated me back towards holding a hammer or a shovel or pushing a wheelbarrow full of earth somewhere in the world. And it was like no matter how hard I tried to find my meaning, I kept just ending up building. And in so many ways, it kind of feels very inevitable that like I've just ended up building. That's what I do, because it's what was everywhere. Everywhere I went, every situation I ended up in, no matter what the intention was at the beginning, it always ended up becoming a construction project.
That's almost like a beautiful sideways definition of what purpose is. It's like it's something that you're actively trying to avoid, maybe, but you can't.
Yeah, it's like, when you know how to do something, but you're eager to learn more. And so we put all this energy into learning something new, and somehow the path just keeps coming back, and we end up diving even deeper into the thing that we already knew quite a lot about. Yeah, it is a nice way of thinking of purpose as a kind of force. It has this pull to it.
Yeah, I think of like a planet, gravity, where you want to jump. You want to fly, you want to do these things in different directions, but it's like pulling inexorably pulling you back to it. And some people manage to escape gravity, but generally for limited amounts of time.
And for a huge exertion of energy.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us a story. I mean, I know one of the first, maybe if I'm correct, one of the first times you tried to make one of those jumps and do something a little bit different was your trip to Kenya.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When I finished high school, I had no great drive to go to college or to do any further studies after high school. I think growing up in Australia, what I felt was a lack of diversity and culture, and that's what I felt like I was missing more than anything. And so my parents are both South African, and I grew up with this East African styled household with, my house felt very African growing up because both my parents immigrated over right before I was born. A lot of the furniture and a lot of the artwork and a lot of the wall hangings or rugs or anything, they were all very African themed. And I had this idea of Africa in my head. And so when I finished high school, I wanted to go and see what that was all about. And so, yeah, I went to Kenya to basically to learn about the world. I had no huge intention. I went on a 3-month program where they kind of helped organize some of our accommodation, and we went there with the intention to go and live in a village and help with the construction of a primary school there. And we went and we did that. So while I was in Kenya, this kind of small, I don't know what to call it, like a civil war broke out. In 2008, the Kenyan election riots broke out, and changed that whole trip for me. The Australian government called everyone back, told everyone to go home. I didn't see a huge need to go home. I was with locals there. I was talking with locals. We didn't think there was a huge risk to me staying. I didn't feel like I got what I went to Kenya to do, which was to learn about the world and experience the world. And I think I felt that jumping on a flight as soon as the real world started happening would have been against my whole reason for being there. And so I decided to stay, and there were times of quiet and times of work while the riots kind of ebbed and flowed. And I ended up working in several different villages and doing a lot of different building projects around Kenya. And I learned a lot. I learned so much about what drives people and what motivates people, what makes people scared and what makes people angry enough to form a mob and go and burn down a building. It was such a huge journey for me, and meeting people in a very different situation to me, where their political leader in their mind really did dictate life or death for them, and it was worth going to war if the right leader wasn't in power. And coming from a very, very gentle Australia and going right into that I was 19 at the time, it was huge. It was huge. I was faced with a lot of big questions and not very many big answers. So that was a really amazing journey for me. There are a lot of positive and negative things that kind of happened to me there. And I think in the end, the negative outweighed the positive. I've never been back to East Africa since then, Yeah, anyway, I don't need to go into that.
I've actually never heard you say that before. About any experience in your life, that the negative outweighed the positive.
Yeah,
that's a strong statement coming from you.
Yeah, I think in the end I learned a lot, and like we learn from any experience, right? It's all educational, but the actual the costs and the cost to my health and just being able to trust people, none of that grew in Kenya for me. It got worse, and that was my specific experience. I was there through one of the most like volatile times in Kenya's recent history, and it's not surprising that people lied to me, people stole from me. I got sick a lot and with malaria several times, and there were just a lot of things working against me. And I think as a naive Australian going into this situation thinking I was going there to help people, to learn, but also to help people. I think I realized pretty quickly that that wasn't really my role there. That's not what I was supposed to be doing. And every door I tried to push in that direction seemed to closed and cost me several $1,000s every time that happened. But that's not to mean I regret it by any means. I think it was such a transformative experience for me, and it's not possible I would think about the world the way I do now if I hadn't had that experience, if I hadn't seen people kill one another over like what tribe they come from. Seeing that as a 19-year-old and really understanding what something can mean to someone else, and really understanding how different ideologies can be, and how something that is so trivial to me can really be life or death to someone else. That taught me a lot, and it really framed me up to have a lot more empathy for people going forward from that. I think it really framed me to be hesitant to judge anyone by their reactions to something, because it's so hard to know what anything means to someone else.
There's like so much that's gone into that moment of reaction that we've never been exposed to, that it makes
exactly.
Like so much underneath that it makes so little sense to judge what we see.
Exactly. And I came back from that trip to Kenya to Australia and was totally enveloped in culture shock, or reverse culture shock, of nothing seeming important and nothing seemed worthwhile doing, and capitalism just seeming like such a joke, and just not feeling very satisfied or finding any purpose in anything that I was doing. But I had to pay back all this debt that I'd got into building buildings and schools and things in Kenya. And so I did that. I made coffee. I worked in construction, and as quick as I could, I think within a year, I was on a plane over to India to find a different organization that I could work with, and basically try again to try and be in another space and learn about another culture and see how it would differ, because Australia wasn't doing it for me at the time. And that trip to India was meant to be 3 months, and I ended up staying there 2 years in the end. I found an organization that was just so honest and simple about their intention, and really reactive to people's needs around them. They were an NGO called Manav Sadhana, and they were so good at listening to what was going on for people and helping find solutions for them in the moment, whether that was building preschools or building a community center, or once we traveled up to the Himalayas up north of Rishikesh to build a bridge for a community that had been isolated because the Ganges had overflowed and washed away the bridge that connected them to the rest of the town. And being a part of an organization that was so agile and adaptable to life was really beautiful. And I saw so much value in that. And it was really amazing for me, coming straight from that Kenyan experience to finding this group of people that had a purpose that wasn't centered around any one belief other than looking after people and trying to empower people around them.
So, okay, I'm curious, because one of the things, let's get into Manav Sadhana a little bit, that's so beautiful, like you said, is the ability to be like, oh, there's a riot over here, let's go there and we'll deal with it. Oh, there's an earthquake, let's go over there and they'll help. When you did the bridge project up near Rishikesh, how did they know someone there, or did they just like roll up there and be like, hey, any bridges that need fixing? Like, how do they? Yeah.
No, basically, there was monsoon, and then there was this massive flood, and the Ganges caused a lot of damage, and it came down through Rishikesh. And do you remember that giant statue of Shiva meditating on the river in Rishikesh? That got washed away in that flood. And this thing is like 5 times the height of me, this massive stone Shiva, and it got wiped out. and they ended up building a new one. But one of the leaders at one of the ashrams up there contacted Virunbhai. I guess they were close, and told him what had happened and mentioned that this community was now having to walk 17 kilometers to the next bridge downriver from their village, and that was their only way of getting supplies or getting access to anything. And so we kind of all rallied together, and we jumped on a train and we just went up there. And I think Virunbhai reached out to the Manav Sadhana network, and he gathered some funding and got us all up there. We had some money from materials. We got put up in a little hotel on one of those winding roads on the Ganges up there, and we just started helping however we could. And in the end, what that looked like was building this bridge. The community managed to place two massive logs across the river, 2 trees, and when they were placing one of them, the one end fell in the river and it washed it away, and it ended up wedging into a stone, and they had to basically abandon the log. They couldn't get it back out of the river, so they had to go and get another one, and they were using a tow truck to kind of slide this thing down the hill. And they had managed to get these 2 logs in place before we got there. So what we ended up doing was putting the decking on and putting some railings up and reinforcing around the base of the logs a bit. It's really funny when I think back on it. It's just like a cartoon, you know. It was like these little planks of like 6x1 timber that we were nailing with a hammer and nail across 2 logs. It was the most simple bridge ever, but it was all that these people needed to be able to get to the main road, to get to town, to get groceries.
Yeah.
And what was kind of beautiful was that we were working from either side of the river. You know, we would get there every day, and we'd be building one side, and the villagers would be building the other side, and we'd be working towards the middle, trying to make this thing safe for everyone to cross over. And I remember that last plank going in, and the whole community, basically the whole village, came to walk over the bridge just to celebrate it being there, just to try walking on it.
Wow, that's beautiful. It is like a cartoon of people, working from each side, so getting closer. It's like the community building version of that, like 2 dogs eating the spaghetti thing.
Yeah, exactly. Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah.
But, I remember having these moments on that trip, of these moments of beauty, which, if I'm fair, I mean, I had those moments of beauty in Kenya as well, these extreme moments of where you stop for a second and you just take stock of where you are and what's happening, and like how you ended up there, how this thing, and ended up exactly where I was. And I strongly remember like straddling a log over the Ganges in the middle of the Himalayas, and like at some point just like realizing where I was and just how incredible it was that this amazingly meaningful river was like running right under my feet, and I'm there and I'm building and I'm doing work. I'm not a tourist. I'm part of this community now. I'm working and I'm helping and I'm eating, and those little moments, they're kind of it's like my photo album. When I like try and think back on these things to tell you about them, they're the moments I remember, the moments of like being in Kenya and like, seeing thousands of bats flying over my head, or being up in the Himalayas and having the Ganges like washing under my feet as I'm hammering nails. And they've got to be the happiest moments of building to me, because it's building with a purpose, and construction has never been much of a job for me. It's always had to have a greater purpose. And I think essentially that's what home building is meant to be. It's meant to have purpose. It's shelter. I don't think we're meant to be an army of ants just like creating house after house after house. I think when we connect banging nails in with hammers and cutting wood with purpose, with like creating shelter, with warmth and safety and security, whether it's building a bridge or building a house or whatever, we we feel very differently about it. We see it differently. The energy we're putting into it is so much greater than the money that might end up in your pocket afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I can sense this similarity. I've heard you talk about that aspect of building before, and even when you were working with Earthships for those years. Remember, you were so not interested in building like a fancy Earthship for a wealthy person or just building a private house for anyone. You were much more called to these schools and community buildings and places where people could come together and experience some of that purpose.
Yeah.
It really resonates with me. Like I feel like I have that just with human gatherings. Like I don't want to just get together and talk about superficial things with people or be in close proximity but watching a TV screen or even a movie that I like. It seems like a waste of the potential. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm with someone, I want to be connecting in a deep way, like getting to know something about the contents of their soul or dancing or do something that just could not be done without other people. And I feel like some echo of that in what you see with buildings.
Yeah. 100%. I think I can't pinpoint when it happened. I think it was a slow transition, but I've always been called to community projects. Maybe it has something to do with the ego. Maybe it goes all the way back to those early teen years when I was trying to discover my purpose, and all that I could really pinpoint was that I wanted to have as great an impact as I could. Not that I wanted to be famous, not that I wanted to have some huge worldwide impact, but just me as an individual. I wanted to make sure I used myself to the best of my abilities, and made the most of whatever time and energy and skills that I had. And at some point, I remember doing the maths and figuring out that it's the same amount of energy for me to build a home for a family to use, and it will serve that family of 5 people for a long time, and it's great. But it's the same amount of energy for me to build that home as it is for me to build a community center or a library or a school, and that building is going to serve hundreds or thousands of people over its lifetime, and those people are going to be served by the building. They're going to learn from the building, and as the builder, the building is kind of my artwork, and so I've learned over the years that I can build in a certain way and can kind of secretly educate people and teach people about building by the way that I build. We were joking, I think, before we started the interview, about putting those screws in and like celebrating the process and celebrating the screws and the job that they're doing.
So like the difference between, building a closet rack or something and countersinking the screws and covering them up with fake wood glue or something versus having them proudly sit on the surface and even spray painting them bright pink to advertise their presence.
Exactly. Right. And so I think what that is it's celebrating the process. When someone sees that, they see a screw and they can imagine that someone had to put that screw in. And whether they want to or not, they're probably imagining that screw is holding into something on the other side as well, something that they can't see. And all these things are little tiny nuggets of information that feed into their overall understanding of how buildings work. I make it my mission now to build buildings in a way that really celebrate the process as much as possible. My dream would be that a 5-year-old and a 50-year-old could walk into a building and both immediately understand how the building's held up, how the second floor is there, how the roof is supported. They see the strong shapes, they see where the load is going and how it's traveling. And it's totally possible. And there's no need to hide those things. It was a cultural thing. It was a fad. It was the ornate finishes, this plaster of Paris, all these things about making things beautiful and trimmed out. It was just one phase of architecture for a period of time. And I think it has done a disservice to the general population in understanding how buildings work and how connected we are to buildings.
I wonder if there's almost like an evolution of a class thing in a lot of houses in the US from, I don't know what decade, but 30, 40, 50, I don't know, 80 years ago. The kitchens are very small and they're divided from the living spaces. And I think it came from a time where there were either servants or just women who weren't really fully people at that point. They're supposed to be cooking and not seen nor heard by the rest of the family, like enjoying themselves in the living room. So they're like cordoned off. And the more modern cultural trend, or anyone I know who would buy a house like that, would immediately like knock down that wall between the which is what my mom did when she bought our house. And it was built in the 70s, but we moved in the 90s. And she just like, the first thing she's, I'm going to just break down that wall so that anytime I'm in the kitchen, I am interacting with the people in the dining room and the living room, and it's all one space and one like flow, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a funny thing that we choose to hide things in our culture. It does seem like a bit of a class thing. You're right. The food analogy is great. We love watching food being cooked. We go into a modern restaurant now, and some of these restaurants have glass or perspex between us and the kitchen, and you get to see everything. And it's doing two things at the same time. It's teaching us something. We're seeing something. It's amazing. We're experiencing our food before it gets anywhere near us or on our plate or anywhere near our mouth. And we're also seeing that there's nothing to hide. Yeah. That the way it's being prepared is beautiful and respectful and good for us, and that there's nothing hidden. There's no secrets between us and this person who we're working with. And that would be a beautiful relationship to have with a builder as well, or with yourself.
And when you're proud of the materials, you're proud of the techniques, then you can just have it all be exposed.
So they go hand in hand. There's this unspoken trust there that, like, if the chef, if they're showing you everything that they're doing, then there's something worth seeing there. There's something that they're proud of as well.
Mm-hmm. There's another example or aspect of what you said as the kind of the building as classroom or teaching tool that was interesting to me. So you're writing this book right now on building, which is a very similar intent. It's like to teach people kind of why buildings don't fall down and how to build. But if I get the principle correctly, when you've built the right buildings, that book will be obsolete. It won't be necessary because people will just be able to be in the building and get all of the information that would have been in the book.
Yeah, exactly. I think they go hand in hand. And I think the purpose of writing a book and building buildings in a different way and having conversations in a different way is that we're at this point right now where a huge percentage of my community, and I'm sure your community, have no idea how to build, but they're all at different levels in that having no idea. Some have done some basic building. Some have helped repair a house before. Some have watched some TV shows about house renovations. And in a way, we've got to meet everyone where they're at. And I think building the buildings in the right way, that's the first step to really embedding this underlying knowledge of how buildings work. I mentioned earlier, I grew up with my parents building the house around me. Basically, we lived in Australia, so it was a very comfortable climate to live in a construction site. But from the age of 5, I really did live in a construction site. We just had the external cladding on the house, but inside it was all exposed frame walls and plywood floors. The bathroom didn't have any sheetrock or anything on the outside of it for years. And the house got built around me as I grew up. But it meant as a kid that I was, ducking in and out of frame walls. I know exactly how far apart 16 inches is because that's how far apart all the frame walls are for me to duck in and out of. And so now as a builder, when I go to lay things out, it's kind of incredible. It's no coincidence how accurately I can guess exactly how far apart 16 inches or 400 mil is, and how big a sheet of plywood is, and all these things that they're little kind of tricks or little nuggets of information that really really just build this knowledge. And they're things that you don't need to learn when you go to it later. I mean, I'm still learning every day how to build new things. I see buildings that inspire me. I see buildings that seem impossible. That, the shape that they've created with these materials seems impossible. And so I've got to learn how they're doing this as well. And this underlying knowledge of how materials work and how buildings have been built in the past, it all adds to helping me being able to understand that a little faster. And so you can imagine the 5-year-old who grows up in a house where they can see the trusses that hold up their roof, and they can see the stud walls or the brickwork or how everything works. Maybe they can see the plumbing pipes that lead to their taps, or maybe they can see the sewer pipe that leads away from their toilet. I think I was 15 before I ever questioned where my poop went when I flushed the toilet. I don't think I ever questioned that. And that's wild.
Yeah.
That doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I think the buildings in a different way, building buildings that celebrate the process, is the first step into creating a bit of subliminal education around how structures work, how buildings work, and it all helps. The book is really the next step. The book is like, oh yeah, you're interested in buildings? Cool, let's talk about buildings. Let's spend the next 2 hours talking about buildings, and let's talk about foundations. Let's talk about concrete and stone, and let's talk about why people built a certain way in one climate and a different way in another climate. And it's really diving into that conversation and taking it further and trying to show people how, while all materials are different, the physics that are applied to them all is the same. And so all we're doing is using different materials to deal with the same laws of nature, whether that's gravity, whether it's wind, whether it's rain, whatever it is, and how to switch them out. There's no perfect house. We haven't nailed it yet. There's no one size fits all solution. And those options, the fact that there are options, can be really intimidating for people. And I think the only way to help people deal with this smorgasbord of choice when it comes to how to build their house and the right materials to use and the right insulation to use and all this stuff is to talk about the principles behind them all. How can you choose what insulation you want to use until you actually understand how insulation works? What actually makes insulation keep you warm, keep your house warm? And so, yeah, I think that's why it's worth kind of taking both of these approaches at the same time and really trying to start that conversation anywhere that I can. And I think kind of the next natural progression from that is I don't think homes were ever really designed to be finished. I don't think there's a point where it's like, cool, the house is finished. I never need to touch it again. I can now spend the rest of my life writing poetry and love songs and doing art. I think,
because that would mean that you were finished. That would mean that you would stop evolving as a person and a family.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. We change. Our needs change. Our physical needs change. We might have kids. Our kids might move out, but our desires change. Our hobbies change. Our work situation changes. And if we can't change our cave to suit our needs, then it's never going to feel right. It's never going to feel like ours. And I think homes have this ability to really feel like an extension of you. It shouldn't just be the color of paint on the wall that says who you are. That shouldn't be the only fingerprint that you place on your home. The rooms can tell who you are. You probably have a music room in your house. You probably have a room that's like specifically where the instruments live, where you play music, where you make that noise. And I don't have a room like that in my house. And it would be weird for me to design a house that had a room like that if I had no intention of ever using it.
Yeah.
And in that way, where we're all different, but it's not just that we're different from each other. It's that I'm different from me 5 years ago, and I'm different from me in 5 years' time. And if you don't learn the skills that can help you adapt and change your home as you evolve, then it's going to be really hard to make sure that that house continues to feel like a home.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not meeting your needs. Like during this pandemic, I'm sure millions of people built or converted or moved furniture to have a home office, where before,
I know, isn't it wild? Millions of people went through the same experience of suddenly spending more time in their home than they ever have before. And I remember the local hardware store here was telling me that they sold the same amount of paint in 2 months that they usually sell in 2.5 years, because so many people were stuck at home and just realized that they didn't like the way that their house was.
Yeah.
But the only skill that most people feel like they're allowed to put into their home is painting.
Yeah.
You know, imagine if all those people had some basic building skills under their belt as well. There would have been extensions popping up everywhere, like dividing walls, new offices, doors being put in. Yeah, it's amazing.
So step one is the subversive education through the buildings that we're in. Step through is like actively seeking knowledge and skills through reading books or, other sources of knowledge. Step three is this like the kind of penetrating understanding that not only do I have the skills now and I can affect the environment I'm in, but it's just a natural evolution that as I grow, my home will grow and change. And so I'm always involved and I'm in relationship with it. It ceases to become this object, and it's almost like another member of my family with whom I'm in relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's an not overriding, that's the wrong word. I think there's an underlying point that needs to be addressed through all of that. With the way that we interact with our community and our world through Instagram or whatever mediums that we do, all we see is perfection all the time. My Instagram feed is full of architecture and building projects, and they're all perfect. They're all from the best angles. They're all perfectly lit. They look warm. They look dry. They look perfect joins. I can't see any gaps or cracks. And there's a attempt, I think, that we can be stepping into these things and feeling like we're not good enough to do it, or that we're not learning fast enough, or that the mistakes that we're making are too great and we're not a natural, so we shouldn't do it. And I can't speak to all aspects of skills and crafts and those things. Maybe there are some things that some people are just natural at and other people aren't. And maybe music's one of those things. I'm sure we could have a huge conversation about that. But shelter shouldn't fall into the category of a craft or a hobby or something that we consider whether we're a natural at it or not. I don't believe. I think shelter being one of our basic human needs, one of the core ways that we survive as humans, I think we're made to do it. I think we're instinctually, and I think it's in our DNA to build shelter and to care about our home and to care about the space that we live in, and to create it a certain way to suit our mood or our needs or our lifestyle. I know, like recently becoming a father and a husband, I have this new instinctual desire that I never had before to make sure that my daughter and my wife are always warm and dry. And I can't get rid of it. I've never kept the fire so stoked in all my life as I have the past 2 winters, because I have this new thing within me that's telling me that. But I think it's so important to be patient with ourselves through the learning process of building and of creating shelter, and not expecting ourselves to be master craftsmen. I teach people how to build now. We run 6-day workshops, and we teach people the fundamentals of building. And I'm not teaching people my 15 years of experience in 6 days. That's just not possible. There's no way I can do that. What I'm doing is distilling the core aspects of what I think are the fundamental principles someone needs to know to start this journey. They're like the stepping stones. They're like the foundation base blocks to someone starting the journey of learning about building, talking about building, attempting building, and eventually teaching their kids about building and teaching their grandkids about building. I'm trying to bring it back to the very basics. And I think it's just so important to remember through this step process that I'm talking about of like building buildings that celebrate the process to diving deeper into the whole process, that we should have very realistic and gentle expectations of ourselves during that learning process, and that it's absolutely worth the journey. It's worth the frustration. It's worth the splinters. It's worth the bruised thumbs. It's so integral. And I think there's this huge sense of satisfaction and accomplishment that can come out of stepping into this journey. When I talk about this being instinctually something that I think we're meant to do, if we're not doing it, I think there's a void that's not being filled. If we're not taking part in the design or creation of our home, if we're not sharing an opinion about it or interacting with it anyway, I think we must be filling that void with something else. And I don't think there's any amount of Netflix or Instagram that can fill the void of creating something yourself and feeling the satisfaction of having a need and fulfilling that need with your hands.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Something there I wanted to follow up on. You talked about the difference between what you see on social media, these like really beautifully built, finished, lit buildings, and the actual process that's quite dirty. And if you're a beginner, like I am, full of holes in the wall and cracks and missteps and things like that. It reminded me of something you said, I think maybe before we started recording, about that pottery. Yeah, the tradition in Japan of putting together pottery. Could you tell us about that just for a moment and make that connection?
Of course. Yeah, so in Japan, the process is called kintsugi. And kintsugi is this art form of taking broken pottery and mending it back together. But instead of hiding the seams and disguise them into the bowl, they paint the seams with gold or silver to celebrate them and to highlight them, right? So they're celebrating the process. They're telling the story that this bowl was once whole. It then got used, it broke, and it's been put back together. And that's part of its journey. It's a scar that tells a story. And we can't help but pick up a bowl that has gone through this kintsugi process and imagine the journey that it took to get there. That's what's so beautiful about scars, is that they tell a story. And even though we have to imagine the majority of that story when we're just looking at a bowl with some gold seams in it, it makes that bowl mean so much more to us. It's no longer just a bowl that our soup is in today at this moment. It's a bowl that someone else's soup was in at one point, and it's a bowl that got broken and got fixed again. And it's had so much love and care and attention brought to it, and so much value. When you think that bowl was made once and then repaired, and now it's being used again, so many people have had a hand in it. And we live in such a wild time where so many things are disposable. So many things are there for a specific purpose, and that's it. And we know things by their product names rather than the materials that they're made of. And it wasn't always like that. And I think it's really recent that it became like that. And I think part of this journey of celebrating the process is celebrating every aspect of it, celebrating the mistakes, celebrating the learning. My little daughter, Inari, she spends most of her day falling over and bumping off things and embarrassing herself, but she's not embarrassed, right? She laughs it off. She enjoys it. And And we take videos of her doing that. And I send those videos to you, and I send those videos to her grandparents. And we all laugh and enjoy this process of this person learning how to be, learning how to walk, how to make us laugh, how to like look at us in a certain way that kind of kills the room. And we're going to show her those things when she's older, and she's going to laugh at them too. She's going to enjoy them too. And she's not going to feel guilty about that learning process. She's not going to resent the fact that she had to go through a process to get there. And the same goes when I think back to those buildings that I first built in Kenya. If I was to go and stand next to that building now, I'm sure I would be embarrassed by the way that I built it, by the mistakes that I made, because I've learned so much since then. And I would never build that building again. But the same can go for a building I built last year. You know, every single time there's processes, there's learnings, there's things that we're trying out and growing and adapting. And that's just the nature of evolution. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating that process. You know, I think we get a little carried away wanting everything to be perfect, that we forget that the only way forward is to try things out and fail slightly and improve and improve and improve.
Yeah, I love that. And it's similar to what you said about the building. Like the building that doesn't need modification is because the person has stopped living and growing. And in the same way, if you look back at the work you've done a few years ago and you don't have that little bit of sense of, oof, it means that you haven't learned anything since then. Like
right.
Somebody yesterday asked me if I had read the pilgrimage book I wrote in 2006 since then. And I haven't in years. And it's because I know I would have that feeling of like, ooh, oh, sure, there was a better way to say that. Because I've learned.
Absolutely.
You know? I've matured. I've grown.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can empathize with that feeling a lot. You know, I just handed in the final edit on this book that I'm writing at the moment. And just yesterday I was reading something. I was like, oh, I should have gone into that in more depth. You know, I should have, and I could email the publishers and be like, hold on. I have another thing I want to add in. But, you know, that process never stops. Yeah. There's always going to be a better way to say it, a way to reach more people, a way to tell a story better. And at some point we just have to accept where we're at and then look forward to the next thing and not spend all our time looking back at the mistakes we've made.
Yeah, well said. We kind of got into this direction that I didn't know we were going to go there, but in my mind, there was this underlying exhortation for the youth to go and travel and just blow their worlds open. And so I just want to kind of continue that a little bit because I think that's valuable by asking you a couple of questions that people often have, especially when we're young. I mean, but anytime about travel. And one is language and the other is money. And I think you have some pretty unique perspectives and experience with those things. So when you went to Kenya and you went to India, what languages did you speak when you got on the plane? Did you speak Swahili? Did you speak Gujarati? Did you speak Hindi? How were you equipped linguistically for those adventures?
Yeah, I'm a white Australian who grew up like an hour north of Sydney. I don't speak any other languages, dude. I speak moderate English, basically.
But then how did you communicate?
You know, I think this isn't exactly to your point, but I will answer both your questions. I think the traveling thing is so vitally important to where we are now and how we know what we know now and the way we feel about the world and about our communities and about our cultures and other cultures. Before the coronavirus took over everyone's thoughts, the Extinction Rebellion movement and the climate conversation was the biggest thing. And there was, you know, a lot of conversation around travel and around carbon footprints and how appropriate it is to catch planes around the world. And I think that's a conversation that's really worth having. But I really strongly believe that not traveling is not the solution we should be looking for. You know, I think the most important thing I did as a teenager was to go and experience other cultures and learn how other people live. In the same way that I subliminally learned how buildings work by growing up in a construction site, I didn't subliminally learn anything about any other culture by only growing around people who were having the exact same experience as me. And it's impossible to feel any empathy for people if you don't have any understanding of what life is like for them. Whether it's much greater and more comfortable than yours, or whether it's harder work and less comfortable than your life. And it's such a important topic for me that I think it's worth bringing up, just because you brought up travel, that we can't stop experiencing each other's cultures, and Instagram is not enough. There's no way to learn about someone's culture through this glamorized version that they put online. And I think those experiences is what has led to such a transformative, empathetic, passionate generation that's around right now, who's fighting for change in every aspect around the world. And if we stop traveling now, our kids are not going to have that passion. They're not going to feel those things. And to answer your questions, that the language barrier has never really been a barrier. I think as well as I do that the words we use are just one small part of the way that we communicate. And you and I are having this conversation with a video one because it's more connected and it's more clear when we can see each other's face as well. I can see if you're distracted. I can see if you're interested in what I'm talking about. I can see your eyes like dart sideways if you hear a noise that maybe you don't want to be hearing. And the same goes when you're traveling and when you're going into a culture when no one speaks the language that you do. You've just got to find that point that you connect on. And in the end, we're pretty basic. Humans are pretty basic, and we need food, we need shelter, we like things and we dislike things. And usually we want to share things. And so as a foreigner going into a new culture and a new context, being open to whatever people wanted to share with me, and trusting that through some medium of communication, through sign language or through grunts and smirks or through laughter, that they would understand that I needed food and shelter. And aside from that, I was just there to learn. I never felt a language barrier, which maybe worked against me in the long run, because now I'm 33 and I still don't speak any other languages. Maybe if I had felt more strongly about wanting to have philosophical conversations with people, I would have learned these languages when I was younger. But that was never my feeling. I've always gotten to know people better side by side, working on something with them, rather than face to face having a conversation with them. And that was my whole experience in my 20s. I traveled for 10 years doing different building projects all around the world. And my friends from that decade are people that I worked next to. They're not people that I debated with or that I might have debated with them as well, but we did it with a shovel in our hands. That was how we connected, because we had a common struggle that was some hard work that we were working through. And it's impossible to hate someone that you're going through a common struggle with. It's such a great way to connect. So yeah, the money thing is a little different, but exactly the same. I definitely came from a privileged background, but it's not like I had some huge bank account that I was dipping into through my whole travels. I paid for a decade of traveling by making coffee and working on building sites. And a lot of that time I was building for free. And so I was trading, I would help someone with one of their basic needs of shelter, and they in return would feed me and house me and share their culture with me. And every now and then I'd end up somewhere where I actually needed to make some money, like New York City. And so I'd go around and I'd find someone who was willing to teach me in exchange for me working for free for them. So I learned to bake sourdough in Brooklyn. I went I went and worked for free in a bakery there, and I was there from 5 a.m. till midday every day for months. And I got to eat breakfast there. I got to learn how to bake bread, and I worked in exchange for that.
Maybe one thing I wanted to kind of highlight, I don't necessarily recommend this to people, but I learned something from watching you do it, because I had a similar period in my life where I spent many years almost without money, traveling a lot. I minimized my needs. So I had very little in terms of expenses, and then I had very little in terms of income, and it always like worked out. But I feel like you did something very different from my observation that I found really radical. And it's just a different way of doing things, but you were never afraid to spend money, and you were never afraid to go into debt. And you were never afraid to like work 2 or 3 jobs to then get out of debt. And I feel like there was this pattern for years where you would just like, you would go to Kenya or something, you'd rack up thousands of dollars of debt, and then you just like work nose to the grindstone 16 hours a day for however many months or a year, get out of that just enough to like get the ticket to go to India. You'd end up in a bunch of debt by the end of that time. And then you'd like work really hard. I mean, you'd have these kind of like a sine wave, these like cycles of up and down that you were comfortable with, in a way that I was always deathly afraid of debt at all. And so it's just a different strategy. But I thought that was pretty bold.
I don't know that it's different, Unk. I think it's a matter of perception. It's how you value the thing that I was spending money on. How many people are going to debt to go to college? How many people are going into mass debt to go to college and learn because they think it's going to pay off in the long run? And often it does. Yeah. And I would say the same for like the debt that I went into. My college was just in East Africa, in a village called Kotolo, and in India, in a city called Ahmedabad. It's like that was my college, and that's what I invested in. And I don't regret that at all, but it made perfect sense to me. I never questioned it at all, because it was really clear to me that that's what I was missing. More than I was missing any further traditional education, I was missing some cultural education and some worldly education. So I went and got it. And that's just what it cost. I think those periods of heavy work that I was doing, working 3 jobs at the same time, coffee in the mornings, cocktails at nighttime, whatever it was, I think you could find a dozen students doing the exact same thing to pay off their university loans.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing so much with me, Harry. I appreciate it. I love it.
Of course. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's really nice.
That concludes another episode of 10,000 Heroes. Your hosts were Ankur Shah Delight and Nathan Ramos. Special thanks to Pierre for the awesome episode artwork, and to DJ Plainview for our theme music. If you like the show and you want to support our mission and our growth, here are 3 things you can do. 1, think of 3 people you know who would enjoy the episode you just listened to, and tell them about it. Call them on the phone, send them a text, send them a link, whatever, but share your enthusiasm. 2, leave a glowing review on your podcast platform if they support it. Having lots and lots of glowing reviews is a great way for us to get found by other listeners. And 3, get in touch. Email us at info@10kh.show. Follow us on Twitter @10khshow. Connect us with people you know who would be great guests. Give us constructive feedback, or just like in point 1 above, share your enthusiasm. Thank you, and take care.